This book is about a very well known man, uh, perhaps the second most written about man in the 50s and the 60s, the second most photographed man, the second most lampooned and cartoonized man, and certainly the most hated man. So it's a narrative biography. It's not a judgmental biography, because Krishna Menon is he's a fit subject for instant judgments. There have been hagiographies on Krishna Menon. There have been hit jobs on Krishna Menon. But what I have tried to do in this book is to allow Krishna Menon to speak for himself through the tens of thousands of pages that he has left behind as part of his archive, which was finally opened after almost 40 years in February of this year. And all these papers are available for scrutiny to anybody at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. I have supplemented his personal archives with archival material of diplomats and political leaders in Canada, the United States, Russia, UK, and most interestingly, even from China, which opened up its archives for a very brief period a decade ago. So this is an archival biography. It's not psychobiography. It's not judgmental biography. It is not retrospective biography. It's a straight chronological account of Krishna Menon's life in his various avatars, which spanned the entire 20th century, as it were. Most of us associate Krishna Menon with 1962, and I'm sure all the questions here will be on 1962, and I'll come to 1962 a little later. Some of us know Krishna Menon's role as Nehru's envoy in the 50s, and his 8-hour speech on Kashmir at the UN, and his record as UN envoy. And I'll come to that too, because that also will evoke a lot of questions. But I think the most interesting revelation for me was the pre-1947 Krishna Menon, who is as colorful and impactful and consequential as the post-1947 Krishna Menon. He was discovered by Annie Besant, a figure who is almost forgotten in India today. But once upon a time, Annie Besant was the fulcrum around which the Indian freedom movement revolved. And in the pre-Gandhi phase, perhaps the most influential personality in Indian politics, who influenced a whole generation of Indians to rediscover their own Hindu and Buddhist heritage. She was then president of the Theosophical Society, and all the great names of Indian public life, Madan Mohan Malviya, Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Jawaharlal Nehru, C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, these were all people who were part of the constellation around the Theosophical Society and Annie Besant. Krishna Menon gets discovered by Annie Besant, goes to England for 6 months and stays for 29 years. And in England, his role in the pre-1947 period really is to be the sole spokesman for Indian independence, indefatigable spokesman for Indian independence, at a time when no political party in England, other than the British Communist Party, was committed to the independence of India in its full form. He was responsible almost single-handedly for bringing Indian independence onto the agenda of the Labour Party. And from the mid-1930s till 1947 was clearly Nehru's man in London as part of the process of negotiations for the transfer of power, in which Harold Lasky, Stafford Cripps, and Clement Attlee play a very important role from the English side, and Nehru plays the pivotal role from India's side, and these lead finally up to the partition of India in 1947. So his role in the pre-1947 period as a spokesman for India, as an agitator for India, as a flag bearer for Indian independence in England, is, I think, something that we do not generally know, and is something it has been widely acknowledged at that time, but has been forgotten since. He played a crucial role in the transfer of power negotiations when two Menons were calling the shots. Sardar Patel's right hand man was V.P. Menon, and Nehru's right hand man was Krishna Menon. And both these Menons played a very important role in the partition of India. V.P. Menon, of course, came up with the partition scheme, and Krishna Menon's responsibility was to convince Nehru that partition was something that is inevitable and that the Congress party should throw its weight behind. He plays a completely unknown role in the drafting of the Indian Constitution. Today, every Indian has discovered a thing called the preamble to the Indian Constitution, and everybody is reading the preamble. As I speak today, I'm sure somewhere in some part of India, somebody is reading the preamble to the Constitution. The preamble was drafted actually by Krishna Menon and handed over to Nehru. Before the Constituent Assembly was set up, the Congress Party had set up an independent committee of experts in which Krishna Menon was a member, and he and K.M. Munshi were largely responsible for the preamble to the Constitution. And in fact, I might say that if there was one man to whom credit should be given for the idea of the Constituent Assembly which produced the Constitution, it was Krishna Menon. From 1933 onwards, influenced very heavily by Harold Lasky, he is trying to convince Nehru and the Congress Party that a Constituent Assembly is absolutely essential for drawing up a constitution for a free India. Mahatma Gandhi is not entirely convinced that the Constituent Assembly is a good idea. It takes almost 10 years for Gandhi to come around. And as you know, the Constituent Assembly finally gets created in December of 1946, and the Constitution is prepared for adoption by November of 1949. So in the creation of the Constituent Assembly and in the drafting of the preamble, Krishna Menon, of course, plays a pivotal role. He was Nehru's literary agent, responsible for publishing Nehru's books. He was a man who virtually mentored both Feroz Gandhi and Indira Nehru in the mid 1930s, and was a central figure for a whole generation of Indians, usually upper class, almost entirely upper class Indians who came from well-to-do backgrounds and ended up either being members of the Communist Party or sympathizers of the Congress Party. Mohan Kumar Amangalam, Rajni Patel, P.N. Haksa, Nikhil Chakravarti, Bhupesh Gupta, Jyoti Basu, Feroz Gandhi, Indira Nehru. This was the Indian student brigade in either Cambridge or Oxford or the LSE. And these were all acolytes of Krishna Menon. And Krishna Menon really played the mentor role to that generation of Indians who went to England to study and were heavily influenced by the British Communist Party. Many of them, and of course Rajni Patel was another name I should not forget to mention. Almost all of them remained either left or communist, but some of them did make the ideological somersault, and the most notable example of a man who made that somersault was Minu Masani, who was a key element of the Communist Party brigade in London in the mid-30s, but by the late 40s had completely gone over to the other end of the ideological spectrum. So this is pre-1947, Krishna Menon. Almost all of it, entire career in England, setting up of the India League, canvassing for Indian independence, founding Penguin Books, and founding Pelican Books. Some of you, when you were young, may have read low-cost books, Pelican with a pelican emblem. And that was Krishna Menon's creation. He was a borough councillor and for 14 years in London, and a remarkable capacity for striking up not just enmities, but also friendships. And perhaps the most important friendship that he strikes in 1935 was with Nehru, as far as India is concerned, and with a young lady called Edwina Mountbatten, as far as UK is concerned. And both these relationships stand him in good stead over the next 2 decades. So let me now fast forward to 1947. In 1947, he becomes, before independence, he becomes Nehru's global envoy. Even before India is independent, as you know, we had a government. Nehru was vice president of the Executive Council and Minister for External Affairs. And he appoints Krishna Menon as global envoy, and Krishna Menon starts negotiating with people like Molotov and other of his counterparts in different parts of the world, even before India has become independent. And one of the key things that he does is to persuade Nehru to appoint Sir Girja Shankar Bajpai as the first Secretary General, as it was then called, of the Ministry of External Affairs. He serves as envoy in England, High Commissioner, from 1947 to 1952, a long period in which his greatest contribution is to ensure that India remains a member of the British Commonwealth. Nehru was very ambivalent. The Congress Party was dead against it. There was no consensus in the Constituent Assembly. In fact, the Constituent Assembly was positively antagonistic to the idea that India should be a member of the Commonwealth. But Krishna Menon, the true Britisher that he was, persuaded Nehru that the benefits outweighed the costs, and that India can be a republic and yet be a member of the Commonwealth. And this was, I think, an early indication of his ability to reconcile seemingly irreconcilable positions, that India can be a republic and still be a member of the Commonwealth. India's constitution, I should remind you, we were a dominion. India did not become independent on 15th of August 1947. Let's be very clear. In August 15, 1947, two dominions were created, the Dominion of India and the Dominion of Pakistan. And the definition of a dominion is that supreme authority rests with the Crown of England. And yet, the Indian Constitution, when it was a dominion, does not go for approval to the King of England. It is approved by C. Rajagopalachari, who was then the Governor General. So, this was really an exception carved out for India. And this was largely Krishna Menon's doing. And this got reflected in India becoming a member of the Commonwealth, when indeed there was not much of a consensus in doing so. For the next 5 years, after 1952, he is Formula Menon. He is known as Formula Menon because he is India's envoy at the UN, and he has a remarkable ability of coming up with solutions to seemingly intractable problems. To him, if you go through the archives and read history, to him can be credited the final solution which led to the armistice in the Korean Peninsula in 1953, problems of Algeria, Cyprus, South Africa, and most notably the Suez Canal crisis in 1956. He was known as Formula Menon, and it was largely because of him, for example, that the Indo-China talks in Geneva, which led to a ceasefire in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos after the withdrawal of the French. Krishna Menon was really responsible for those India-China accords. One remarkable year in which perhaps Krishna Menon reaches the height of his glory is 1955, a year that is almost completely forgotten in this country. He almost accomplished in 1955 what Kissinger accomplished in 1971, which is the rapprochement between the US and China. In 1955, after Bandung, Krishna Menon goes to China for 8 days, secures the release of 4 imprisoned US pilots, goes to America, has 2 meetings with Eisenhower, 6 meetings with Dulles, and almost accomplishes the impossible, which is the resumption of diplomatic ties between China and the United States. That didn't happen, but that finally it had to await Kissinger's historic visit to Beijing, to Shanghai and Beijing from Islamabad in July of 1971. So this was a period in which Krishna Menon reached the peak of his international influence. He was hated by the Americans. He was looked upon with great suspicion by the Russians. He was tolerated by the British. And he was an equal opportunity offense giver at the UN. But everybody recognized that behind his ability to offend everybody lay an ability to solve problems and come up with solutions as well. 57, he becomes defense minister. After comes back to India, he becomes a member of parliament, contests from Bombay. He can't speak a word of Hindi, can't speak a word of Marathi, but he sweeps the election in 57, becomes a member of the Lok Sabha, becomes defense minister. India has had a series of senior administrators as defense ministers. It had Baldev Singh, it had N. Gopal Singh Iyengar, it had Nehru himself for a 2-year period, and it had K.N. Karju. And generally, the Prime Minister was very dispirited and disappointed with the functioning of the defense ministry, and he felt that Krishna Menon would be a breath of fresh air. And so he appoints Krishna Menon in 57. The first 18 months, Krishna Menon could do no wrong. For the next 2.5 years, he could do little right. And that really is the story of the 5 years that he was defense minister. And I'm sure we can discuss this a little more in detail. His relationship with Timaya, his relationship with the armed forces, his relationship with people like Manekshaw and Thorat, and Thapar and Kaul. These are all the stuff of military legend. And of course, his downfall comes in November of 1962 after the debacle in the invasion, in the aftermath of the invasion of China. However, the story that I want to say, which is forgotten by us, is that throughout the 50s, Krishna Menon was the only man arguing for a negotiated settlement on the border with China. He proposes this in the early 50s. He continues to advocate a swap deal, that India recognized Chinese sovereignty in Aksai Chin and China recognizes India's sovereignty in Chumbi Valley. Tawang had still not yet come as part of the Chinese demands. But Nehru, by 1958, is in the autumn of his tenure. He's in a period of long political and biological decline. He's unable to persuade his cabinet colleagues, particularly Pandit Pant, that India can negotiate with China and India must negotiate with China. Parliament was not agreeable to any negotiations. The Indian media and Indian public opinion was against negotiations, and therefore even Jawaharlal's visit of 1960 results in nothing concrete, and finally we have what happens in 1962. 1962 to 1974, the last 12 years, he's only an MP. He quits the Congress party when he's not given a ticket, because by then Nehru had died, Indira Gandhi was very weak, she could not protect him, the knives were out for him. He leaves the Congress party in 67, contests as an independent candidate against the official Congress candidate in Bombay. And as a fast forward to what is happening today in Bombay, the entire campaign of the Congress candidate, Mr. S.G. Barve, was actually run by the Shiv Sena. The Shiv Sena had just been created, and it had been encouraged by two very senior congressmen, S.K. Patil and V.P. Naik, who was then the chief minister of Maharashtra. And the Shiv Sena's single point agenda was South Indians go home. These dark South Indians, dhotiwalas, undu mundus, as Thackeray called them, should leave Bombay. And the epitome of that was Krishna Menon. And on top of that, he was a communist. So the entire campaign of the Shiv Sena was anti-Krishna Menon. So he loses. 69, he contests in a by-election in Midnapore, in West Bengal with CPM support. He becomes a member of parliament. In 71, he goes to Kerala. He becomes a member of parliament from Trivandrum without speaking again a word of Malayalam. It campaigns entirely in English. And in 74, of course, he passes away. I think, to summarize, therefore, Krishna Menon led a very, 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 multifaceted life. Pre-1947, post-1947, a diplomatic envoy, author, publisher, editor, counselor, but most importantly, as Gautam mentioned, the soulmate of Nehru from 1935 to 1962, and really part of Nehru's family because of his special relationship with both Firoz Gandhi as well as Indira Gandhi. I think what happens after 1962, of course, is that Krishna Menon recedes from the public memory, but not very rapidly. He's still around because he's a member of parliament. He's still a peace crusader. He keeps writing articles. He keeps giving interviews on everything but China. And I think the manner in which he conducted himself after his loss of power gives him new dignity and gives him new respectability. Power corrupts, but the loss of power traumatizes. And Krishna Menon, I think, proved that there are exceptions to the rule, and he adjusted to the life without power and authority with grace that very few people associated with him. And I think it is in that the Krishna Menon acquired the larger than life image that he had, which led ultimately to Hastings Road being renamed Krishna Menon Marg. Of course, now Krishna Menon Marg is closed because our Home Minister lives on that road. So it's barricaded from all sides. A statue that has been put in front of Sena Bhavan. So Krishna Menon became a larger than life figure. Let me end by saying, why write this book at this stage? I think most biographies in India are hagiographies, or, as I said, hit jobs, and very few political biographers can able to distance themselves from the subject. Gopal's biographies of Nehru and his father, Radhakrishnan, Rajmohan Gandhi's biographies of Gandhi, Rajaji and Patel are very, very honorable exceptions. But by and large, biography writing as a genre in India is virtually non-existent. And I believe that biographies must be written with primary material, not on oral histories, not on oral recollections or interviews, but we should allow the primary material to speak the story. And so therefore, whether it was Indira Gandhi, whether it was P.N. Haksa, or whether it's Krishna Menon, it really is the availability of the primary material that has dictated this biography. And the fact that he was a colorful man, he had different aspects to his personality, very, very colorful in more respects than one. And he was colorful in his personal life, although he'd never married. But he was extraordinarily charming. And the India League I have described in the book as a one-man, many-human army. He had a remarkable ability for drawing young men, but even greater ability for drawing young women into his firmament. And they became very big figures later on in public life, which you will see in the book. So to summarize, therefore, this is not a book to resuscitate, revive, rehabilitate Krishna Menon. It is a book, warts and all. It's very critical of Krishna Menon in 1962. It's very critical of Nehru in 1962. And I think we should be honest about our leaders. I think we should be honest. Great men make great achievements, but their failures get magnified. Small men make small mistakes, great men make great mistakes. It's as simple as that. And so I have not held back from what happened in 1962. There are lessons for us which are still relevant today. But I think overall, Krishna Menon gave India a profile in the 50s which was disproportionate to its economic might. India punched and boxed about its economic position. A large part of it had to do with Krishna Menon. And of course, it had to do with Gandhi and the fact that Nehru was seen to be taking forward Gandhi's legacy. So extraordinarily controversial, extraordinarily complex, but also very consequential for India's policy in both foreign affairs as well as defense. And I think that's the reason why this book has come. And of course, the other reason, as Gautam has mentioned, that the electoral verdict of 2014, followed by the electoral verdict of 2019, gave me enough time to go to the archives and burrow through the archives and put together all this material that you see in the book. So I apologize for the length of the book, but there's a lot of masala in it.